Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. On today's broadcast, we'll be taking you through part 2 of the Conjurer build. This is your Shaman Occultist build and it's going to have a huge focus on bleeding damage. We're also going to be whipping out the physical damage, and we have a two-handed weapon in our main hand slot because this build does not care about standing right in front of everybody and throwing down with the best of them. Today's video is going to give you a couple more devotions down our path of the bleeding tree, getting to Drogan the Wolf, and we're going to go over a couple gear options that you can pick up right around level 50 that will make this build sing even more as we go into the edge of normal, leveling up into elite, and getting ready for some of those shredded resistances to start making things a little bit more difficult for us. In order to keep this video short and simple, we're not going to waste any more time, and let's get started with our brand new devotions after hitting level 50. The best part about the devotions at this point is that they're all going to be very easy to complete, so you can get up to the big bad wolf himself. After the ones that we talked about last week, which are our Falcon, our Night Talon, and our Fox, we've got two more this week, followed by the big boy, but we're going to start off with Toad. Toad is ultimately going to be giving us 3 affinity for both the Ascendant and the Eldritch, which is our purple and green, both of which we need to get over to Drogan. Toad is going to give you 8% vitality resist, you're going to get spirit and offensive ability along with a very small amount of vampiric attack with flat health, and you are going to get a % increased damage to beasts. You get a little buff to vitality and aether damage, but we don't care about that, along with all those bonuses to pets. Toad is going to be worth its weight in just affinity, and that's going to get us closer to where we want to be at the middle point of our devotion journey. That said, once your Toad is completed, you'll make your way over to the Crossroads constellation, the very first set of points that you can put in, and you will only need one, because all you have to do is put 1 Eldritch Affinity into the Crossroads to get your 18 offensive ability, and that will crack open the access to Drogan the Wolf. Drogan is going to be your premier bleeding damage constellation or devotion, and it's going to start out by giving you a huge bonus to your flat health, which is 300, along with 35 offensive ability, making it very easy to hit things and crit them as the game goes on. We're also getting bonuses to pets throughout Drogan, but I'm going to ignore all those because we're not a pet build, and at least for now, that's not in the build plan. After that, though, point number 2 is going to give you 80% increased to your bleeding damage, and you're going to get a 10% increase to everything that is categorized as undead, which is fantastic because there is a lot of really annoying undead enemies in the Arcovian bad guy repertoire. So point number 3 is going to give you another 350 health, right there at the bottom of your health bar, making you even more huge. You're going to get 50 defensive ability, making you harder to crit, and you are going to get 20% vitality resistance, buffing up that stat, getting us ready for ultimate when it starts to shred away. Your 4th point in Drogan is going to give you a flat 54 bleeding damage over 3 seconds, which is going to scale up exponentially, along with the 80% increase to your bleeding damage with a 50% increase to the duration. Anything that increases the duration of bleeding damage is going to be much more useful because increasing those very small duration numbers is pretty big considering how often they tick. Healing effects are also going to be increased with this point by 20%, so our Blood of Droog and any other healing effects that we go for in this build will immediately get buffed by another 20%, making them exponentially more useful. Your 5th point for Drogan the Wolf is going to give you 15% elemental resistance, 15% bleeding resistance, and +3 to your maximum bleeding resistance, making that an almost negligible stat when it comes to enemies hitting you with bleeds. Mug is absolutely one of the best constellations out there, and it feels really good finally being able to pick it for all of the right stats with a build. Now, the cherry on top for Drogan the Wolf is going to be the activatable ability at the end called Howl of Drogan. This is going to have a 15-second cooldown, but a 10-second duration when you activate it. We've got it equipped to Primal Strike for decent activation, but this is going to add 174 flat bleeding damage over 3 seconds. It's going to buff your bleeding damage by 275% at level 15, which is what we've got it at currently, and it is going to reduce the target's defensive ability for 3 seconds by 144, which is a pretty significant amount. While the Howl is going on, you're also going to increase your health regen by 100%. You're going to get an 18% increase to attack speed. Again, this is level 15, so it's been well used by now. But you're also getting a buff to your casting speed of about 15%, and those will only go up until we max the ability out at level 25. All of that being said, it's essentially a passive that will activate every 15 seconds for 10 seconds. So there's only really a 5-second downtime that you won't have this passive going, and make absolute use of all the shredding that it is going to do to everybody around. It even gives you a little cool red swirly effect. You can't really see it because we're hanging out in the void so much in this video, but it is pretty sick. And that is everything for the devotion menu today. We've cleared it off. We've got our big important wolf boy backing us through all the damage that we do now, and things are going to get even more meaty as we get into elite and ultimate the further that this build goes. Now, there are a couple gear options for the build that are available after level 50, and if you can find these items or craft them, they're going to make your experience even better. Because of the way that this build works and its ability to just run up and smack people with the weapon, on top of all the fun casting that we can do, there is a definite ability to deal more damage while you're standing on top of all of your bleeding damage that is just going and going and going. Now we're going to start over here with the Relic, because the Relic unfortunately is one of the more disappointing parts of this build, because there's no great option for relics that do bleeding damage between the Empowered and Transcendent Relic levels. We're going to have to stick with Zeal, because Zeal is going to give us pretty decent physical damage. It's going to buff all the damage that we do, and we're going to get huge amounts of offensive ability and defensive ability from it. So we're actually going to hang on to Zeal right as we level 35 and take it all the way to level 90 when we can pick up Massacre. In the interim though, because of the way that Zeal is increasing our offensive ability by a % amount, along with the flat buffs to offensive and defensive ability that it provides, it is going to be useful for that entire time period. That being said, it also gives you a skill called Zeal itself as well, and that is a 50% chance on crit that you are going to be able to do a whole bunch more damage for 2 whole seconds. It's on a 6-second cooldown, so 2 seconds might not seem like a lot, but while that 2 seconds is happening, that means you're doing 25% extra crit damage, your offensive ability is jumping up yet again at another 60, and you get 50% more attack speed, which is nuts. So basically, when you are hitting the crit with Zeal, you're going to be able to have a very small window at which your other abilities are going to deal ridiculous amounts of damage. More than that though, defensive ability helping you do more critting with this build while you're standing there whacking people underneath your vines is very good, and like I said, the options aren't incredible for the Empowered Relic tier, so we're working with what we've got. The next easily craftable piece of equipment that you'll pick up for level 50 specifically is called the Solar Waistguard, and this is a blueprint that you can pick up from the Homestead faction, provided that you have given in enough reputation with them that they will sell it to you. But basically, once you equip the Solar Waistguard, you're going to be getting buffs to Lightning, Vitality, and Electrocute. None of that damage is particularly impactful for our build, but you are going to be getting +1 to every skill in Shaman, along with a Lightning Bolt that comes down on a 10% chance to attack. That Lightning Bolt dealing lightning and electrocute damage and stunning targets that it hits, but more importantly, that Lightning Bolt is going to activate almost constantly because of the amount of times that we deal damage with this build. Because our damage over time is the big focus, those vines, those swarming, devouring locusts that we fire out, everything that we do with this build is going to tick constantly, so that 10% chance to activate happens very often. You should see plenty of lightning bolts raining down in this video, and that incidental damage is still big enough to make a difference. All that being said though, the +1 to all skills in Shaman at level 50, you can also get this at level 35. There should be a blueprint for 35 and onward, but either way, whichever one you have, +1 to all Shaman skills is great, at least until you find yourself a fancy blue or legendary purple belt to make the replacement with. It's very good to rely on until that time comes though. After you've gotten your belt figured out, you can pick up what is known as Pakla's Skins. Pakla's Skins is a monster infrequent that you'll find throughout Act 5. You should be right around level 50, but once you find Pakla on your way to the Coven's Refuge, you can put on her face, I guess, as it is so disgustingly made out to be, and get yourself a huge number of bonuses because she will always drop this item for you. As soon as you put on the desiccated skin of Pakla, she's going to give you 4 to 6% vampiric attack, so we're already adding some decent vampiric attack to our pool. We're going to get increases to vitality damage, along with some buffs to our health regen. You're actually going to get buffs to the base amount of health regen from 13 to 19, but you're going to get increases to the overall health regen as well, anywhere from 15 to 21%. Because health regen is a valuable stat for shamans, it is really cool that this mask helps out for that. More importantly though, it looks exactly like it should be on a shaman because it's going to give you +3 to Savagery, which you'll remember is our main hand attacking ability. It also gives +3 to Blood Pact, which is something that we're going to completely ignore because who cares, and the remaining things that this mask is going to do are going to modify skills that we're already using. Starting off with the changes to Windigo Totem, we're going to get another 120 vitality damage right on top for the abilities of the Windigo Totem to activate, and it comes with a 15% chance to fumble the target for 2 seconds as it's going off as well. That 15% is also going to impair the aim, so that's just a fancy way of saying it's going to blind enemies on a 15% chance. So really, when you lay down the Windigo Totem, you have a 15% chance to both blind and silence any enemies hit by it for 2 seconds, which is really fantastic because at this moment, we're mostly just using it to heal when we need a decent heal button standing and fighting some larger monsters. Now, once your Windigo Totem buffs are all internalized and you can figure out how good that button is, we're going to go ahead and buff Savagery some more because Savagery is a cornerstone of this build. Unfortunately, it's not bleeding damage, but vitality damage is a pretty good backup for Savagery, and we're going to get 40 of that added to the base, along with converting 100% of the lightning damage into vitality damage as well. The reason that that is good is because as this build develops further towards level 94, the lightning damage that we're working with will undergo an evolution into vitality. So the base build of the shaman has some options to make those conversions that we'll talk about once we get further in the build, but just remember having vitality damage on Savagery along with a conversion of the lightning damage into vitality damage is going to be very helpful later. We also get 80 defensive ability when Savagery is activated, so that in and of itself making us harder to hit makes it all the more fun to just stand there and whack people with our whacking stick until they fall over. The only real downside to wearing Pakla's skins is that you're wearing Pakla's skins, so you just take a trip over to your friendly neighborhood illusionist and turn that skin into something that is much more cool to look at, or at least less disturbing. Unless you like that type of thing, at which point I would highly recommend the movie Silence of the Lambs. The next super useful item that you can find that is guaranteed from a monster to drop is Guss Ring of Hungering Rift, specifically for the one that we're using, but Guss's Ring will drop from the mountain deeps when you are hunting down that shrine, so make sure to go find this invisible little goober and take his most precious ring. The ring itself is going to give you a flat increase to your physical damage, which is fantastic because that's one of our big two, and it is going to give you a buff to chaos damage, which we can completely ignore. On top of that, we're getting buffs to our spirit, we're getting flat increases to our spirit, flat increases to our health pool, which is another shaman delight, and offensive ability increases as well. That offensive ability increase in the form of a ring is actually really fantastic because a lot of the early game rings I feel like that we're running into don't sport that specific stat. We're also getting, you guessed it, some more health regenerated per second, along with another % increase of that health regen. So just like Pakla, Guss is saying, here's my ring, shaman, use it. I know you'll keep it and love it forever because you definitely don't have a flaming volcano to throw it into, and that would make me really sad. After we're done filling the Dying Wish of Guss, though, we can talk about the Pierce and Bleeding Resistance stats that this ring will give you, anywhere from 15 to 21 for the Piercing and 12 to 18 for the Bleeding Resist, which is fantastic because a lot of the time those resistances only come from, or they're a lot easier to get from components and augments than they are typical in gear. So having a ring that's going to help us out in those departments is actually really handy. The final two stats that this ring provides that are actually incredibly useful are going to be a +3 to Drogan's Pact, which is inevitably our big tanky passive skill on the Shaman tree, and +2 to Sigil of Consumption. Now you might be wondering why that's important, seeing as how you haven't seen a single Sigil of Consumption in this entire playthrough so far, and that's because it gives us the option to use a very big AoE ability on top of our vines in the future. So we could basically lay down a whole bunch of vines, lay down a very big Sigil of Consumption underneath that, and those two will deal a mountain of damage over time in a specific area. Now I haven't decided yet if I want Sigil of Consumption to be part of this build, but having the opportunity there I think is worth its weight in gold because this particular build is still in the very early stages of theory crafting. There is but one more item to talk about before we talk about the glyph that we used as far as we are hitting level 50 for our movement, but the item that I want to talk about is the Razor Leaf Glaive. Now this weapon is a two-handed sword built for every shaman out there who likes to swing two-handed weapons and deal bleeding damage. It was a little bit of a contest between this and the Troll Bone Crusher, so if you find yourself without the Razor Leaf Glaive, don't feel like you have to go farm this weapon out until the end of time, because ultimately while it is good, the Troll Bone Crusher will carry its weight all the way through Elite and Ultimate while you find replacements as the levels increases for the Bone Crusher. So you'll find an Elite Bone Crusher and you'll find an Ultimate Bone Crusher, which will still do phenomenal work as a big, huge beaten stick. Let me know if you made it to the end of the last video to even get to that point, but the Troll Bone Crusher is still worth its weight in gold, even though the Razor Leaf Glaive is basically a diamond-tipped sword. Now the reason that the glaive is so awesome is because number one, it's going to be doing physical damage, which is, like I mentioned a little while ago, one of the two big damage types for this build. Secondly, it's got 100% armor piercing, and it's going to give you a flat amount of bleeding damage to all of your attacks and abilities. That is going to be anywhere from 96 to 144 over 3 seconds, which is disgusting. But more than that, you're going to get an increase to all of your crit damage, meaning that that offensive ability is not going to waste. You're getting buffs to your bleeding damage overall, anywhere from 100 to 149%, which is nuts. And we're getting big, flat buffs to cunning. The reason that Cunning and those flat point increases to Cunning are very important is because increasing Cunning actually physically increases the bleeding damage that you can do. If you hover over the stat at any point, you can see putting points into that will increase your bleeding damage, which is crazy because you basically have a DPS increase button anytime that you level up and you have an attribute point to spend. Obviously, you're going to need to spend some of those on strength and spirit in order, or physique and spirit, sorry, in order to put on different pieces of gear, but Cunning, while it is helping you put on other forms of gear, is also just going to flat out increase the amount of bleeding damage that you do. Hence the reason Cunning from the Razor Leaf Glaive is very important. Now, again, it's a shaman weapon. You know what I'm gonna say. It increases your health regen by 23 to 33 flat. So those base health regen numbers are going up, and everybody that's doing that buff for our percent of health regen per second is even more useful. Now that we're done gushing over our health regen though, we can talk about the increase to attack speed that the Razor Leaf Glaive provides, anywhere from 10 to 14%. Attack speed does come around pretty often in this build, so being able to whack harder and whack faster may have a lot of very concerned parents banging on your door wondering what you're doing in there. The very last stat on the Razor Leaf Glaive though, that is very important to every shaman out there, is going to be the +2 to all skills in shaman. So if you're keeping track just on this video alone, we have 2 items giving us plus points into all skills in shaman, and that means +3 to everything that we've picked up just passively from having our belt and this weapon equipped. And if that alone isn't enough to sway you into using the Razor Glaive over your Troll Bone Crusher, the final skill that comes along with this sword is called Healing Winds, and you have a 20% chance on attack to activate it. It has a 3-second cooldown, but that 3-second cooldown is going to give you 675 health restored. If we take the 20% healing effect increase that we are getting from Mug Drogan the Wolf, we're going to see about 810 flat healing in total for the Razor Leaf Glaive. So every 3 seconds, you're going to be getting 800-ish health back, and considering that we're under 10,000 still on the health bar as it is, 800 is a pretty huge chunk of healing. But remember, you can get level 1 glyphs from the Conclave of the 3 at any point, so if you want to go talk to those guys, just activate that portal really early on, go pick up a glyph, have yourself a fun time hopping around. Anyway, the glyph in question for this build is going to be the Glyph of Seismic Strength. It's going to give you access to the Seismic Leap ability, which, as you'll have noticed, is a leap, and it can go in any direction that you choose, forward or backward, and it does a fairly good amount of damage when you land. That damage comes in the form of 215% of your weapon damage, which is nuts because two-handed weapons are physically the highest amount of damage that you can get on a single weapon in this game, and we're going to turn 30% of our retaliation damage added to that attack. So, with your weapon damage and your retaliation damage added to attack, this thing is going to smack. Not only that, but it comes with its own flat amount of physical damage, internal trauma damage over 3 seconds, and the pièce de résistance, the bleeding damage over 3 seconds. So this ticks every check mark as far as an ability goes, and it is fantastic. So when you find this glyph, equip it right away and have yourself a great time. That is it for me though, everybody. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll be back next time with the elite version of this build, but I will see you then.